Hello to all the listeners, and welcome to a night of terror. Let's begin tonight with a quiet tour of a small town in Easton, where they have a very special school for the gifted. I had no prior belief in the preternatural, paranormal, or mythical. I was very much the atheist and a practical man, but the events of that night changed me for the worse. I'm hoping that someone might know what I'm dealing with, and know whether I should stay or constantly look over my shoulder. See, I had been introduced to Christopher about a month prior. He already had a soured reputation before reaching the school grounds. Thanks to the news, they covered his story completely. Easton was known as the go-to place to drop off developmental disabled students that parents weren't able to handle. A horrible reputation to have. I know. But we're good at what we do. A full-fledged boarding school with a massive campus. We housed about 500 youth aged 9 to 22. Most students moved to group homes once they aged out. We focused on functional skills rather than academic ones. I worked the second shift at the B Wing as a supervisor, which housed the most behavioral students. It was a 10-story building equipped with state-of-the-art dorms, classrooms, gyms, kitchens, an indoor pool. Everything the students need to minimize the need to leave the building. We even have a mini grocery store inside. I was against keeping the students cooped up with no public interaction, but that's a different story. Christopher was scheduling to join B Wing. Much to everyone's disdain, he had made the news for stabbing his mother over 20 times during a schizophrenic episode. It wasn't the act that made him a news phenomenon, though, but rather his backstory. To lend perspective, most of the children we housed were born with their diagnosis: autism, fetal alcohol syndrome, Down syndrome, etc., etc. Either that or acquired brain injury. They normally received intensive therapeutic services starting at age 2, through high school and beyond, honestly. Christopher, however, did not. See, he did not fit the picture. He was very much born a normal child. He was socially developed and intelligent, a B average student at school. He had friends, crushes, teenage worries, and even a newspaper delivery job. But one day, right around his 13th birthday, something ticked in Christopher. The parents described it as a literal night and day difference. He woke up and was no longer the son they once knew. Overnight, Christopher suffered a mental breakdown of sorts and developed full-blown schizophrenia. This was accompanied by auditory hallucinations, more commonly known as voices. The parents described a chaotic scene. That morning filled with violence, rampage, and blood-curdling screams. The mother was stabbed, and the father had to restrain the boy, nearly killing his son. Eventually, Christopher was sectioned into a hospital where he received his diagnosis. The doctors were stunned by the sudden onset of mental afflictions, given his normative behavior. They were able to identify 3 different voices that affected Christopher, all of whom encouraged him to do unspeakable things. Each voice had a specific name, one of which was the foulest of the 3, and the rarest to occur. The local news dubbed him the boy who broke down. People speculated how such a breakdown could occur in the first place. Many blamed the parents. Others accused the father of abuse, while police interrogations cleared the parents of wrongdoing. But there was always a tinge of uncertainty looming over them. Either way, the Christopher Tavern, once there, had ceased to live, replaced by a scared, mentally fissured boy. Many of the staff protested his onboarding, citing that he needed a more restrictive environment. Although we've had our fair share of violent kiddos. See, Christopher's story posed a dramatic allure that honestly intimidated us. After extensive therapy and years' worth of experimental drugs, the doctors found the perfect mix of medications to quell the voices burdening Christopher. Though the voices would never fully go away, they could at least suppress the foulest of the three, Topaz. The other two were manageable, but Topaz had been the one to encourage his mother's stabbing that morning. Each time Topaz emerged, Christopher made an attempt at someone's life. Since the inception of his current medication, mixed though, Topaz hasn't emerged for well over 2 years. The boy was eventually deemed qualified for community reintegration. At the age of 20, Christopher was set to board our school. I vividly recall my first time meeting him. He was tall, very tall, about 6'6" and lanky. His skin reminded me of a bruised peach. It was molted and blotched with an unsettling rubber band appearance to it. His eyes unusually avoided ours, but when he did make eye contact, it was a piercing gaze. His personality also fluctuated, making me wonder if he had dissociative identity disorder on top of all of it. He was either mute, quiet, and meek, or mischievous, childlike, and cunning. The boy I first met was the former, and he answered with single-word responses. Yes. No. Uh-huh. You can imagine my shock when I met the mischievous side of a week later. That side spoke in full sentences, was articulate, caused trouble, picked fights, and antagonized other residents and staff alike. We were not thrilled by his addition to the wing. About 20 days into his move-in, the incident occurred. See, I was working with a good crew that night. There was about an hour left of our shift, and we were finished up with our daily logs. Most of the kids were sleeping, but Christopher was up and about, teasing one and another of the boys. I had left the office to chassis him down in the lobby, which looked more like a giant living room. Bao was already there trying to pry the two apart. Though small, she was mighty. Whereas most female staff would be afraid to alone with him, she wasn't afraid to grab the bull by its horns. She would later admit in privacy that she was terrified, but she'd never let that show in the moment. It's 'cause he's a little bitch. Fuck you, Therese. You have your own games. You two lost. You know, take mine. Kyle was a good kid. A bit of trouble on his own, but always pure-spirited. Being about 5 feet tall with Down syndrome, Christopher towered over him. You suck at games. Anyway, give them to me. He shoved his shoulder and held his hand out. demanding the Nintendo. Val intervened. Christopher, enough. It's 10:15, and the others are sleeping. Tone it down and go to bed. I will not. He flashed a wiry grin that modeled his intentions. Yes, you will, I interjected. He spun around, and our eyes met. This is the third time I've had to address you. You're a grown man at this point. Make a grown decision. A devious grin shifted the corners of his mouth again. Sorry. He held his hands up in a mock defense. Kyle owes me some games, that's all. I do not. You'll have 0 games in a moment, Val responded. And it'll stay like that for a week. Christopher spun back around, his arms following him like little loose Twizzlers. Shut up, cunt. His tongue was sharp. I was about to cut in when Bao stepped into his space, challenging him. Or else what? The two exchanged glares, making for an tense moment. Chris eventually conceded with a wave of his hand, sucking his teeth while settling his crosshair back at Kyle. Baby needs mommy to protect him again. I thought we were grown-up men. He backed away and fell like a tree on the couch, pretending to watch TV while he flicked his fingers. Val and I exchanged glances. I pointed to my radio, to which she gave a nod, and sighed before attending to Kyle, who still wanted a go at him. I shook my head and headed back to the office. The nights were long enough already, but Christopher posed a particularly challenge that no one wanted. A couple of the staff put in their resignations shortly after he joined. It was tempting at times, I won't lie. I headed back to the office and complained to my coworkers. Going through the usual triad, as we chatted and got our paperwork in line, I heard a squeal and the harsh sound of furniture going against the wooden floor. On cue, Val's voice blared from the radio. Franco, I need you here, now. I nodded towards the others and scrambled. Sensing the urgency in Val's voice, when I rounded the corner at the end of the hallway, I saw Val holding Kyle's head in a protective hold. His eyes were bloodshot, and there were reddening marks around his neck, clearly outlining of hands. My eyes scanned the room and spotted Christopher off to the side, looking lost. You stay right there, Val shouted at him. Christopher's eyes darted maddeningly between her and Kyle, who was barely responsive. What happened? He happened, she said while holding Kyle. Kyle's movements were sluggish, choking his words as he attempted to speak. He lunged at him. What did you do, Christopher? I spat the words out. Christopher gave me a pitiful look that showed me his complicity. What the fuck did you do? I repeated. I'm not proud of my lost composure, but based on the situation, I wasn't sure if Topaz had finally made an appearance after all these years. I grabbed my radio. Possible Indigo. I need everyone to the lobby. My voice echoed through Val's walkie, overstimulating my heightened senses. I didn't mean to. Christopher backed into the wall, his eyes continuing their dance between the three of us. Franco, Val spoke low. He would have killed him had I not stepped in. I kept my eyes glued to Christopher, who must have reverted to his quiet personality, or Quiet Chris, as I called it. I recalled the crisis guidelines from his case file. Should you respect Topaz has made an appearance, approach it cautiously. The subject will need to a 3-to-1 staff ratio. Signs that topaz may be present include, but are not limited to, a sudden burst of extreme violence, explosive movements, an asphyxiated gaze, a targeted look that indicates topaz may have locked in on an individual to inflict bodily harm. The subject may also twitch, tap his eyeball anxiously, or cover his ears. Christopher had demonstrated a past ability to snap out of it, as if you should confront him with his full name, Christopher Tavern. Ask him if Topaz is in the room with you. Should he say yes, you must demand that Topaz go away. Instruct Christopher to bid Topaz farewell. Administrator, a PRN medication of clozapam. These should measure fails. Okay, guys, let me rephrase that because whoever wrote this is illiterate. Administer a PRN medication of clozapam. Should these measures fail, staff discretion is advised. Contact emergency personnel and proceed with a restraint, if necessary. I walked up to him. Christopher Tavern. A blank stare. Is Topaz here with us? A pause. No. Are you sure? Yes. Then what happened here? Another pause. Uh-huh. No, we're not doing uh-huh here. I need an explanation. Kyle is choking. Uh-huh. Fucking hell. Guy, what happened? I grabbed his shirt. Christopher looked back at Kyle, then looked at me. Then I saw the switch. His eyes narrowed down on Val. And then his searing look of what I could only describe as pure hatred contorted on his face. Murderous intent tightened his eyebrows. At that moment, a surge of protective energy ignited my tactical senses. I got in his face and slammed him against the wall. Christopher Tavern bid Topaz farewell. His face remained stuck, hatred oozing through his very pores of his skin. Christopher Tavern bid Topaz farewell. I slammed him again, threatening Topaz directly this time. Topaz, if you don't leave, I will take Christopher away from you. A momentary pause. I held the man in front of me. For someone of his size and stature, I was surprised by how brittle he felt. I shouldn't have been able to manhandle so easily. He felt bone hollow. The other staff had already rushed in, standing behind me as events unfolded. I hadn't noticed when they had arrived. The primordial instinct to protect Bal tunneling my vision. I looked back to take inventory of the room, emboldened by now that I had backup. When I returned to face Christopher, a different look had taken a hold. One of regret. Regret, sorrow, and something else. You know that look a dog gives you when you yell at them for digging through the trash, or how they hang their head and are everlasting sorry for their terrible, terrible transgression? That's what I saw. A hurt boy who was genuinely afflicted by guilt. I began to feel bad, remembering that there was still a boy under there. But I also felt relief. Relief that Topaz may have finally left. Oh, how I wish that were true. I noticed something. Under that look was something deeper. A beady blackness behind the eyes revealed something unnatural. I was staring directly into the boy's soul now. You know how they say that the eyes are the window of the soul? It couldn't have been more true in that moment. Something wasn't right. Then his face changed again. as I caught the speck of his soul, his expression contorted from sorrow and remorse to alertness and panic. I don't know how to explain it, but he knew I peered into him, as if I had intruded on a secret I had no business discovering. He beamed at me like a caught criminal, then bolted with an animalistic agility that caught me off guard, sending me tumbling. Topaz. I felt how light his body was moments ago, brittle as a sack of feathers. Where did the speed come from? I took off behind him, hopping over furniture and desks that he tossed with minimal effort. I remember hearing that should have been my cue to back off, but I continued my chase. We reached the end of the lobby where he turned around, backing against the wall and window as his chest heaved like a massive barrel. And there it was again. That beady blackness, intensified, time diluted, and in that moment, we stared at one another, analyzing each other, our souls mirroring. His eyes told me I shouldn't be able to see him, that I didn't belong there. An overwhelming feeling of grief and dread gripped me. Everything told me to flee and preserve myself. Time resumed, and he spun around, yanking at the latch of the window. "No!" I shouted as I lunged after him, clawing the back of his shirt. But I was too late. He plunged head first out of the 10th-story window. I shot my head out and watched him plummet, my heart sinking. I couldn't fathom it. Suicide? It's truly amazing how many thoughts can run through the human mind when experiencing or witnessing death. Besides your life flashing through your eyes, other thoughts trample in your brain like a child's kaleidoscope toy, all fighting for a chance to be seen. What will I tell my family? How will the news cover this? What if the others see his body? Will I be incriminated for this? Scenarios and scenes played out these fleeting sounds, each with dismal outcomes. Then, my thoughts were interrupted as my eyes snapped to his feet. I'd never seen another human dive to their death, but something about his manner of falling was uncanny. I watched as his feet arched and tucked in. His knees swooped and angled unnaturally. He folded and tucked his arms into his sides, allowing his body to ball up. Then the unthinkable happened. His body swooped upwards, the way a witch on a broom would if she were to nosedive and suddenly pull up. I expected to see his body crash into the pavement in a mass of guts and bones, but I didn't. I watched on, stunned as his body cut the air. In what must have taken a fraction of a second, a pair of heavy, skinned wings unfolded with a powerful burst. They were the most hideous wings I had ever seen. It looked like human skin stretched to its uttermost limits. Veins, stretch marks, and scars tattered its hide. I felt the wind from his takeoff as he zipped by the window like a gunshot. Then he was gone, quicker than I could have snapped my fingers. I fell back, the window shaking right in front of me. Then, nothing. I stared at the moon through the window, replaying that last second in my mind like an infinite loop, trying to rewrite what just happened. Then, goosebumps shot from my earlobes to my elbows, down to the very tips of my pinky fingers. What I saw was impossible, an affront to all things natural, something not meant for human comprehension. I have no idea what I had just seen, but I knew it was pure evil, a creature unbelonging of this world. I wanted to vomit. Topaz will be back. I'm sure of it. I am writing this as a sort of documentation of events. The investigation into Christopher's disappearance is still ongoing, but I know what happened. My coworker saw the boy jump, but didn't see the wings nor the takeoff. I don't know when he or it will come back, but he will. If anyone can shed the light on this, or has answers to what I encountered, please contact me. I can't keep living in hypervigilance. I need to understand what creatures walk among us. May God protect our souls and lend the blood of Jesus. So the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. Genesis 3:14. Credit D.R. Anthony. Well, that was an interesting story. Talk about a small, quiet town with an insane asylum, or should I say a school of gifted people, and that dude is definitely gifted with some kind of demonic entity. Don't know how to explain that one. I would rate that, honestly, 7.97. It's got 34 votes on creepypasta.com. If you want to go check it out, it's there. It's called Easton School for the Gifted. But while he was in that school, he probably wrote a couple letters in his free time. And one of those letters could be a letter from Dundee Lunatic Asylum that he wrote to somebody there. You don't know. I don't know. All I know is the next story we are reading is, and that's right, I've already said it, a letter from Dundee Lunatic Asylum. This one is written by J.D. Butchmiller. First, I would like to begin by extending my internal gratitude to you for reaching out to me with a genuine, open mind. So many have come to me after I ceased in my search for someone who will listen. But all have been not, but seekers of wealth out for a good story. You have brought relief to my troubled mind that you should seek truth, and I long more than anything to give it to you. I have come to find that the day of my tragedy, or the day of the tragedy, was November 6th, 1855, when Lord Thomas Lynn Bowes wrote to me in request for my services. His brother Claude had been taken ill by what he assumed to be an early stage of tuberculosis, and noted that my success in fighting the disease was what was required. He offered me room and boarded for as long as necessary, and to pay my travel expenses. The tragedy, then, was that I accepted. Of course, I had been well aware of the running rumors of the secret monster being held at Glamis Castle. I was not such a simpleton. I wasn't superstitious either. Seeing is believing. And I have never been one to base my decisions on mere children's stories. So I wrote my response to the Earl of Strathmore, and arrangements were promptly made for my lengthy visit to Glamis Castle. My first order of business upon arrival was to examine Claude and his condition. The man was ill indeed, but he did not appear dire, as his symptoms had only recently surfaced, and I found no need to move him to a hospital just then. I felt confident that treating him early would promise a speedy recovery. So I treated him for his cough, provided him with something for the pain, and prescribed rest and fresh air for the remainder of the day. During this time, I was offered a tour at the grand estate, which had left me in an impressive awe. The castle was a glorious and majestic as tales foretold, with its fortified stone structure, bright colored walls, high ceilings, and grand fireplaces, in what appeared to be in every room. The details on the decor and various trinkets are quite exquisite, and I felt forbidden to touch anything, as though I toured a museum rather than a home. We decided not to tour outside, as the autumn rain hadn't let up. I had arrived late, and this was in the afternoon anyway, and darkness fell quickly. I was permitted to dine with the family, and I accepted this invitation as well. The Lord was greatly hospitable man, and he managed to lead entertaining conversation despite his recent anniversary of his late wife's untimely passing, only a couple days prior. While this was something on which I could relate, I had figured that our alternative topics of discussion were an effective distraction from our grief. I'm sure you're wondering, and I'll leave you to wonder no more. The subject of the castle's secret was not broached here, and I felt no need to inquire about it. We simply enjoyed conversation involving our similar interests in hunting and cricket, and I will submit that his lordship would like best to be at me both, though he had no chance to confirm my theories. After a hearty meal and making light-hearted conversation, the Earl thanked me for traveling all this way to render my aid, and I was shown to my most lavish and spacious chambers. I'm not certain such luxury was necessary, but I was met, and I have to mention, the Earl was most accommodating. Once I was left alone, I unpacked and settled into my new quarters for the next several days. Before turning in for the night, I made sure to review the notes I had taken out of the condition of the Earl's brother. Despite the posh surroundings, making me feel as though I was on an extravagantly expended holiday, I'm sure not to forget the purpose of my presence there, and the reason I was being afforded such luxurious hospitality. I managed to confirm the Earl's suspicions that his brother had tuberculosis, and proceeded to prepare my means of treatment. It was then, on this first night, that I had heard a distant groaning sound. At first I thought perhaps I had misheard the sound of an animal from the woods nearby or the wind of the storm outside. But then I heard it a second time, and confirmed it was surely neither. Absolutely, it was a tenant of Clamsh's castle groaning, and there could be no other person emitting such noises besides the Earl's brother. So, I gathered my medical bag and left my room prepared to administer treatment. I subsequently ran into the Earl in the corridor. "Evening, my lord," I greeted. "Never you worry. I can hear him from my chambers. I'm headed there now." "Pardon. The Earl appeared confused. In turn, confused me. Your brother, I explained. It seems he may be experiencing some pain, as I can hear his groans. I was on my way to check on him, and I had assumed that you were on your way to summon me. Not at all, the Earl replied. I had just completed some late work. But if you say you can hear my brother suffering, let us go check on him together. The Earl led the way to his brother's chamber and gently opened the door. But when I cast the light of my lantern into the room, we found Claude fast asleep. I quickly exited to keep from waking the lad. I apologize, my lord. I was certain that I could hear him groaning in pain, but perhaps he only did so in his slumber. Perhaps, the Earl replied as we proceeded down the hall. The storm is also increasing outside, and the wind tends to make unsettling noises along the walls and towers. I spent my boyhood on this estate, and to this day the sound of the wind keeps me up some nights. I'll keep it in mind, sir. Thank you. I'm sorry to have bothered you. Not at all. Get some rest, Doctor. You as well, my lord. I didn't hear the sounds again that night, even with the storm blaring on outside the window. The following day was rather routine. I cared for Claude and made sure he received proper treatment, and his cough lessened throughout the day. The subject of the sounds I thought I heard the night prior was not raised. Instead, the Earl and I thought perhaps a particular chambermaid had taken a liking to me. He offered to introduce us, but I confess I had not yet found myself in a position to court another potential bride. And of all people, I'm certain the Earl of Strathmore understood. Before turning in for the evening, I checked in on Claude one last time to make sure he was doing well, and to provide him with something for pain, just in case he truly was what I heard the night prior. If so, this should ensure I heard nothing later that night. At this point, I felt I had a decent grasp on Claude's condition, and felt no need to review my notes. Instead, I prepared to head back directly to bed. But as I was undressing, I heard the same distant groaning I had heard the night before. I paused for a moment to listen, and I heard it again. I was certain it couldn't have been Claude, because I made sure to give him enough medication to lull him into a painless sleep. I decided to test the Earl's theory and opened my chamber window to listen for the window. But the air was still outside as the storm had passed, and the only movement of the trees was from a bird fluttering about the branches out yonder. The Earl was wrong. I shut my window and heard it yet again. As though someone with Glamis Castle groaned over a dull ache. I could surely hear it, and it had a distinct vocal tone, as if a woman were a young boy. No, it certainly wasn't Claude. I was sure of it. I can't tell you what it was that came over me, only that I felt a pressing need to discover the source of this distant moaning sound. I took up my lantern and exited my chamber into the darkness of the castle. I stood outside my door for a moment, listening. When I heard it again, I was still unsure where the sound was coming from, only that it was deep within the belly of the castle. So I decided to wander onward down the long, dark corridors on my own. I must say, the beauty of Glamis Castle vanishes at night, and gives way to a dark, ominous emptiness that demands difference from all who enter it. As I wandered these empty corridors, I felt the need to appease it, and only assure the emptiness that all I cared about was discovering the source of the moaning, and rendering aid if necessary. So with great caution, I proceeded to follow the sound to wherever it may lead. It echoed about the past vast space, almost as though there were many residents suffering on the estate. As it turned out, the source wasn't far. At first, it seemed to come from a room at the end of the corridor, but upon entering the chamber, I found it completely empty. Dusty, even, to attest that no one had used this room for months, at least. I stood within the cold blackness of this room and waited for the sound again. And there it was. A painful moan, still distant, but somehow coming from the other side of a wall. I exited the chamber and entered the chamber beside it. It too was empty, and I stood to listen again. To my disappointment, the moan failed to resound. I stood for what seemed about 20 to 30 minutes. I was afraid that I would resonate again if I left, but soon I was forced to relent. I would likely hear it again the following night. So at long last, I exited the room and took a note of which room it was. I would return on the morrow to continue my investigation. I proceeded to make my way back to my chamber when I heard the Earl call my name. I turned to acknowledge him. "Is everything all right?" he asked me. "I seem to be having trouble falling asleep," I told him. "I meant to find a balcony of a sort to help myself get some fresh air, but these corridors appear mighty different at night, and I found myself lost. I feel quite fortunate to have made it back to my chambers. If it is fresh air you need, Doctor, I can lead you to a balcony on this very level," the Earl offered. For some reason, I suddenly found myself hesitant to accept the Earl's offer. I'm not sure what it is. What was I afraid of? But I could no longer find it within me to trust the man. Steeling myself, I resolved that my feelings were ungrounded. "Yes, I would appreciate it," I said. "Thank you, my lord." I followed the Earl to the balcony where I lit my pipe and offered to light his cigar. "Don't tell me you were up late again, my lord," I said with the hope of avoiding a potential awkward silence. "There's always work to complete, it seems," he replied. "Don't tell me you were hearing groans again." "Not at all," I replied. "I've concluded it must have been your brother groaning in his slumber." I made sure to give him something for pain and sleep tonight, and it seems to have worked. No, I'm not sure what it is that keeps me restless this night, but I'm certain this pipe and fresh air will do the trick. While in truth I had not sought fresh air, I did find the cool autumn night rather refreshing. A thin mist swept over the woods in a comforting embrace, and I felt its chilly droplets kiss my cheeks. Autumn nights at Glamis Castle truly possesses a unique breed of beauty. The Earl's presence kept me at ease. However, after some meaningless small talk, I managed to dismiss myself back to bed, where I only proceeded to toss and turn. I estimate that I only accomplished 2 hours of sleep before sunlight steamed through my window and awakened me thusly. I proceeded with the day as normal. Claude appeared to be improving, so I kept the treatment status quo. There was an air of apprehension between me and the lord of the household, but I hoped it was only in the mind, and maintained civility between us. At one point, I realized I had run out of my medication in my bag, and I headed to my room to grab more. On my way, I ran into the chambermaid, who greeted me with a gleeful smile, and I greeted her in return. But then I realized that this would be an ideal time to ask her a couple questions while we were alone. Do you ever hear strange noises around these corridors, miss? Particularly groaning sounds? Particularly at night? Oh, don't you know, doctor, the chambermaid teased. All castles have their ghosts. I opted to humor her. Yes, but they tend to move about. But these sounds, I found they lead to one place. Oh, doctor, no, you shouldn't go around searching at night like that. His lordship will think you're searching for his secret room, and he'll dismiss your services. Is that so? I replied. I appreciate the warning, miss. Thank you for your time. I ended the day intending to search for the cause of these mysterious noises again that evening. But thanks to my severe lack of sleep the night prior, I opted instead to retire early and catch up. I slept soundly that night and proceeded with the same routine I slept soundly that night and proceeded with the same routine the following day. I managed to question more of the staff, but was only offered similar answers to what I received from the chambermaid the day before. I wasn't swayed, however. Rather, these evidential rehearsed responses only renewed my determination. It seemed I am not the first to have gone snooping about Glamis Castle. Other guests had been caught seeking out the Earl's mysterious room, and the Earl had ended their visits promptly afterwards. I began to wonder if the sounds I had heard were only connected to this room, as the staff had clearly made this assumption. It wasn't long before it became a need for that I shall discover the source of the nightly groans within the castle walls. I dare say it had become almost an obsession. That evening, I checked up on Claude for what would be the last time, but it was no matter. Claude had stopped coughing and was only a week from being bedridden for so long. I advised him to start walking around the estate on the morrow, but to take it easy. As precaution, I gave him a final dose of medication for coughing, pain, and to help him sleep before I retired to bed myself. Or so everyone thought. I was prepared to begin my search the very moment the groans resounded. I knew exactly which room to head to, and come hell or high water, I would uncover the secret, and I would end the pain of the sufferer. Claude had been healed, and now this mysterious individual would be my new patient. Much time went by without a single sound. Not even the wind which the Earl had offered as a scapegoat blew outside my window. At length I grew impatient. I lit my lantern and made my way down the corridor to the last room I had visited during the most recent investigation. As I approached the door, the first groan of the night made itself known. I slowly opened the door and found the room empty, just as it was before. I made every effort to be silent with each step I took inside so not to obscure the sound of the groaning, and I listened intently. It came along, long groaning in its suffering, but it sounded as if though it was coming from within the wall, or above it. When I heard it again, I confirmed both theories simultaneously and escaped the room to make my way up to the third floor of Glamis Castle. I kept watch for the Earl, whom I imagined to be working late again, and endeavored to be clandestine in my pursuit. Upon my arrival to the third floor, however, the moans didn't grow any clearer. They sounded just as distant, perhaps even more so. I followed them inside another empty room, where they now seemed to be coming from below me. I presently found myself growing frustrated. I knew I was imagining this, or the sounds would follow me evenly about the estate, both day and night. When the moans came again from beneath my feet, I finally yielded and began searching the floor. The mystery was maddening, and the need for answers was absolute. I tell you, I had to come to the point where I would have torn up all of the Glamis Castle if that was what was necessary to find the suffering person and bring them to peace. And when the light of the lantern caught in an unnatural groove beneath a particularly placed rug, I knew on the moment I was that much closer. I lifted the rug and uncovered a trapdoor. I felt my heart leap with excitement. Surely I would find this poor lost soul now. I threw the door open and climbed down the rickety ladder, which led me to a short tunnel. The air was blacker than black there, the light of the lantern only reaching inches ahead of me, it seemed. Now some may think I slowly made my way down the tunnel one cautious step at a time, but I assure you I was in a hurry to get to the bottom of this. I made haste down the tunnel and approached the wooden door at the end rather quickly. Only then did I hesitate, feeling a bit nervous about what I might find on the other side. I am human only, after all. The groaning came again, louder, and was now clearly female. It provided me the courage necessary to twist the knob and slowly push it forward. What lay beyond is why I'm here today. The room was average in size, lit by dying candles burnt to the base. The air reeked of death and formaldehyde, masked in a hint of safe. The shelves which lined the walls of this rather cold space were stocked with bottles of preservatives and medications, jars of body parts and herbs. There were tables of surgical tools and journals, and soiled rags and sheets were tossed to the filthy floor. But what I recall most of all was the horrifically decayed body of a young woman lying on the long, still surgeon's table. Her arms were missing. A metal rod protruded from one socket. Half of her left leg was also missing, replaced by another steel shaft. Her body was riddled with cuts and sutures, and her torso had been left open with metal tools jutting from the massive incisions. Upon my fearful gasp, I swear on my mother's grave, the woman turned her gray head to gaze at me with a single glass eye. "Help me," she groaned. "You won't let me rest." She must have seen the stark look of terror in my eyes, and to this day I regret doing nothing to help her. At that moment I couldn't bring myself to move, much less speak, but the living corpse attempted to sit up and acknowledge me further, which, as you could imagine, was rather a chore with no arms. She twisted and jolted about the table, grunting from the effort. "Please," she groaned. "Help me." The corpse soon managed to sit up, the towels tumbling out of her abdomen and spilling onto the floor. That was when I finally rediscovered my ability to move. I didn't scream or yelp. I still hadn't rediscovered my voice. I didn't even close the door. I simply ran. I no longer intended to spend another day at Glamis Castle. I didn't even care to receive pay for my services. I wanted out. So I left. As you well know, I endeavored to bring this matter up with the police. The Earl had unearthed his late wife, Charlotte, and was bringing her back to life, and I dare I say successfully. I begged and beseeched them to go and see for themselves, but of course the Earl had managed to convince them that I had gone insane from the grief of losing my own wife, and I had invented this story of fantasy out of a pit of hope. Thus you wrote to hear me. Thus you write to hear me at Dundee Lunatic Asylum. Now I find myself begging and beseeching you to go and see for yourself. Take the curious public with you. If need be, I could show you. I remember the way vividly. But I am not insane, and I fear for the next person who passes beneath the Earl. They will not be able to rest in peace, as he will subject them to his unholy ways, his unethical experiments. Again, I am eternally grateful to you for taking the time to read this in my full. I await to hear about your tour to Glamis Castle, and I pray it will bring me liberation. Much luck to you. Credit J.T. Butch Miller. Well, there you have it. 2 interesting stories. This has been a live creepypasta reading. If you enjoyed the live stream, remember, hit the like button. Because with 20 likes, I'll be back. And for those of you who see this in the future, sleep well.